to Hardware Unboxed. Today, we're taking a look at GPU performance in Starfield by testing 32 GPUs using 3 quality presets and 3 resolutions. So there's a lot to go over. And actually, this isn't my video. This isn't my testing. This is Steve's video. I'm just hosting the video for him. So Steve's still a little bit unwell, so put your best wishes in the comments below. Somehow he's managed to test 32 GPUs with all these quality presets while being sick. But anyway, I'm here to present his video. But before we get into the results,
today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th gen CPU contact frame by DeBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LJ1700 sockets bends 12th gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool, so for more information, please check the link in the video description.
okay, so if you want to know what all the various quality settings do and how best to optimize the game for either performance or visuals, then be sure to check out yesterday's GPU optimization guide, the video that I made. This video is less about analysis of visuals and all about FPS numbers, and for this we will be using the built-in presets, though with FSR2 manually disabled, at least for the majority of the testing. Now the first step was to work out how we should go about testing such a vast title. Where's the best location to benchmark Starfield? After a little over an hour of gameplay, we found that the forests of Jemison were the most demanding section of the game we'd come across. Initially, we did start testing in New Atlantis, which will be a great area of the game for CPU testing, but for GPU testing, the forests were more demanding. This is why you might see that our numbers are a bit lower than other testers. These forests are seriously demanding, and we wanted to show performance there as the baseline minimum you can achieve when poo hits the fan. Other areas of the game do perform a bit better, so as always, in addition to looking at raw FPS numbers, margins between products is a good guide if you want to compare what you currently have to an upgrade option listed in the charts. Now for testing, we've focused on the medium, high and ultra presets, though please note while all of them enable FSR2, we've manually disabled upscaling for the bulk of our testing as we wish to show you native performance. That said, we also have some FSR2 results for you as well. The CPU for testing is the Ryzen 7 7800X3D with 32GB of DDR5 6000 memory, and we're using the latest AMD and NVIDIA display drivers. So that means Adrenalin 23.8.2 and Game Ready 537.13. As usual, we're using Windows 11 and resizable by is enabled by default, so let's get into the data. Starting with the 1080p Ultra data, and please note we're using the Ultra preset here but with FSR manually disabled, so we're testing at the native 1080p resolution. Here we see that the 7900 XTX is faster than the RTX 4090, rendering 102 FPS opposed to 93 FPS. Neither GPU is particularly impressive given we're only testing at 1080p, but just 93 FPS from the 4090 is quite shocking despite being very playable. In fact, the 7900 XT was comparable with the 4090 here, making it 22% faster than the RTX 4080, which was limited to the same 72 FPS as the 6950 XT. Then maxing out at 60 FPS, we find the 6800 XT, while the 3090 Ti was good for just 54 FPS and the 4070 Ti 53 FPS. The 6750 XT and RTX 3080 are the cutoff for above 40 FPS gaming, but if you're somehow okay with a console like 30 FPS experience in the most demanding areas, there's a range of products that will work, from the new $500 RTX 4060 Ti 16GB down to the 6600 XT. Beyond that though, you'd surely start to reduce visual quality. Now increasing the resolution to 1440p is going to be very problematic for the majority of the GPUs tested, as we see the 7900 XTX drop down to 82 FPS and the 4090 to 78 FPS. In fact, it's not even possible to sustain 60 FPS with an RTX 4080 in the forest section of the game used for testing. That said, the old 6950 XT is comparable with the 4080 here. For frame rates in the mid-40s, you'll require an RTX 3090 Ti or RTX 4070 Ti, and for just on 40 FPS, the 3080 Ti or RX 6800 will work, so pretty brutal stuff here at 1440p. Meanwhile, we have GPUs like the RTX 4060 Ti 16GB rendering just 27 FPS on average, the same result we received from the old 5700 XT. Still, that's a lot better than the 5 FPS we saw with the 6500 XT. Then we have the Ultra 4K data, and you'll want to enable FSR even with an RTX 4090 or 7900 XTX, as both render less than 60 FPS. The 7900 XT and RTX 4080 were usable here, but again will require upscaling, so that's less than ideal. Now, lowering the quality preset to high while still manually disabling FSR, we see the performance for the 7900 XTX improved by around 16% at 1080p. The RTX 4080 saw a much larger 25% performance improvement, though it was still quite a bit slower than the 7900 XT. This time, for averaging around 60 FPS, we find that the RX 6800, RTX 3080 Ti, and RTX 4070 all work. Interestingly, we're looking at around a 40% performance boost for the GeForce GPUs, and only a 19% increase for the RX 6800. I found in my optimization guide that the issue here for GeForce GPUs is ultra quality shadows in foliage heavy areas, so like where we're testing, whereas high quality shadows are far less taxing for the green team. Still, even at 1080p high, it's crazy to find GPUs such as the 6750 XT and 4060 Ti 16GB unable to deliver anywhere near 60 FPS, while parts such as the 5700 XT, 6650 XT, 2080 Ti, and 3060 were all limited to around 40 FPS. Once again, jumping up to 1440p makes things much more difficult for these GPUs, and now even the 7900 XTX struggles to deliver a high refresh rate experience, with 96 FPS on average, and then we see just 91 FPS from the RTX 4090, so surely Nvidia has some driver optimization work ahead of them. As you'd expect, the RTX 4080 and 7900 XT were able to deliver highly playable performance, though just 58 FPS from the RTX 4070 Ti and 3090 Ti was troubling to see. Then from AMD, it took the Radeon RX 6900 XT to break 60 FPS. Then for over 40 FPS, you'll require an RTX 3080 or RX 6800, some very tall demands there for what really is a subpar PC gaming experience. Of course, this is in the most demanding section of the game, but yeah, that's probably the best area to test. Anyway, of the 32 GPUs tested, 11 of them delivered between 30 and 40 FPS. Now, at 4K using the high preset, we're down to 61 FPS as the best result possible when using the RTX 4090, closely followed by the 7900 XTX with 59 FPS. Meanwhile, the 7900 XT drops to 50 FPS with the RTX 4080 at 47 FPS. For around 40 FPS under these conditions, you'll require either the RTX 3090 Ti or 6950 XT, and anything slower will need some upscaling help. So now it's time to look at performance using the medium preset, but again with FSR manually disabled. At 1080p, the 7900 XTX was hands down the fastest GPU, outpacing the RTX 4090 by a 15% margin, as the GeForce GPU was limited to the same 120 FPS as the XT version. The RTX 4080 did manage to render over 100 FPS, though that only placed it on par with the 6950 XT, while the 4070 Ti struggled to outpace the 6800 XT. Normally you'd expect the 6800 XT and RTX 3080 to be very evenly matched, but in this example the Radeon GPU was almost 30% faster. In fact, the 3080 only just beat the 6750 XT. Again, it's crazy to see current generation products like the RTX 4060 Ti rendering sub 60 FPS frame rates using medium quality settings at 1080p. The RX 7600 wasn't much better with 53 FPS, which actually makes it slower, but at $270 US it's a lot cheaper than the 16GB 4060 Ti. Those of you rocking older hardware, say from the Pascal era, if you wish to play Starfield, you'll have to dig deep and get yourself a pretty significant upgrade. The GTX 1080 Ti was good for just 35 FPS. Increasing the resolution to 1440p drops the 7900 XTX down to 108 FPS, which is a 32% increase from what we saw using Ultra and 13% from High. The RTX 4090 was 6% slower, rendering 101 FPS, while the 7900 XT easily defeated the RTX 4080 by a 16% margin. Again, the RTX 4080 was only able to match the 6950 XT with 80 FPS. For over 60 FPS at 1440p using the medium settings, you'll need at least an RTX 3090, 3090 Ti or 4070 Ti from Nvidia, while the 6800 XT will work from AMD. Then down around 45 FPS, we find the 6750 XT delivering slightly better performance than the RTX 3070 Ti and the new 4060 Ti. Beyond that, we're quickly heading down into 30 FPS territory, and at that point, you're best off lowering the resolution and or quality settings. Finally, here's the 4K medium results, and as we've seen time and time again with Starfield, it's pretty brutal stuff. As usual, at 4K, the RTX 4090 was able to take out top spot, rendering 70 FPS to beat the 7900 XTX by an 8% margin. Then the 7900 XT finds itself situated between the XTX and RTX 4080 with 55 FPS, making it 15% faster than its nearest GeForce competitor. I know we've seen it time and time again, but it still amazes me that we're looking at just 40 FPS from the likes of the 4070 Ti, 3090 Ti, and 6900 XT, this time using medium quality settings. I know we're testing at 4K, but even so, those are some seriously low frame rates using some super powerful gaming hardware. The 6800 XT averaged just 38 FPS, and yet our day one review data, which is based on 15 games using high/ultra settings at 4K, sees an average of 61 FPS from this same GPU, and I'll talk more about this later. Further down the graph, we find that parts such as the 6750 XT, 3070 Ti, and 4060 Ti are all unable to render 30 FPS. So even with the medium quality settings, there really are very few GPUs that can play Starfield at 4K. Now, before wrapping things up, here's a quick look at FSR performance, which is worth investigating in some detail, given the game enables FSR with all 4 presets. For the Ultra preset, we're getting what amounts to quality mode with a 75% render scale, and this boosted the performance of the 6800 XT by 13% at 1080p, which is a pretty weak gain. Oddly, the 7600 only saw an 8% uplift, while the RX 6600 enjoyed a 15% uplift, and although the 6500 XT saw a massive 56% uplift, it didn't really matter given how poor performance was already. What's really odd is the fact that the GeForce GPUs don't appear to benefit from using FSR, at least not for the most part, and that's odd because normally scaling is fairly similar. Jumping up to 1440p did see some benefit for the GeForce GPUs when using FSR. The RTX 4060, for example, became 24% faster, though we only saw an 8% boost for the RTX 4070. Meanwhile, the 6800 XT went from 47 to 57 FPS, and that's a 21% increase. Again, though the RX 7600 didn't scale that well, just a 13% boost in that example, while the RX 6600 enjoyed a massive 40% increase. Then at 4K, the 6800 XT was 34% faster using FSR, and the RX 7600 a massive 56% faster, which is crazy given we saw very little improvement at 1080p and 1440p for this GPU. Then we see a 75% increase for the RX 6600. For the GeForce GPUs, the RTX 4070 saw a 25% boost, 43% for the RTX 4060, 45% for the RTX 3060, and 63% for the RTX 3050. Now using the high quality preset drops the render scale to 62%, so you'd expect the FSR gains to be greater here, and they are. At 1080p, we're looking at a 24% increase for the 6800 XT and RX 7600, 30% for the RX 6600, and 36% for the 6500 XT. And I have to say that scaling makes much more sense when compared to what we saw using the Ultra preset. Still, the gains for the GeForce GPUs aren't as impressive. The 4070 was 14% faster, then just a 10% boost for the 4060, but oddly a 30% boost for the 3060 and 36% boost for the 3050. The FSR gains increase massively at 1440p. Here the 6800 XT is 38% faster with upscaling, 41% for the RX 7600 and 50% for the RX 6600. Then with the GeForce GPUs, we saw a 26% increase for the 4070, 28% for the 4060, 36% for the 3060, and a massive 59% increase for the 3050. Then at 4K, the 6800 XT went from just 33 FPS to 53 FPS using FSR, so a 61% uplift in that example, though this time the 4070 did enjoy a comparable 55% performance boost. Last up, we have the medium preset, which sets the render scale to just 50%, and at 1080p, this looks truly awful, like unplayable bad, so no idea why this is the default medium setting at this already low resolution. The 35% performance boost for the 6800 XT simply isn't worth degrading the visuals that much with FSR, and it's the same story with the RTX 4070. The degradation to visuals with FSR enabled isn't as bad at 1440p, though the 50% render scale is still pretty nasty, but the 65% increase in performance seen with a product like the RX 7600 will be worth it for some, especially as it gets you up over 60 FPS. Then at 4K, the 50% render scale is far less of an issue, and the 92% performance increase we see with the 6800 XT is kind of nice, as is the 80% increase for the RTX 4070, though generally speaking at 4K I'd like to use a higher render resolution. Starfield has been an exciting release for gamers, and despite the insane levels of hype, it appears to be mostly living up to gamers' expectations. Not something you can often say about game releases these days, though after Baldur's Gate 3 maybe we're on a bit of a roll. Of course, the only potential problem with Starfield is the performance. The hardware requirements are extreme, or at least they can be, depending on where you are in the game. In terms of GPU performance, we believe we've tested one of the most, if not the most, demanding section of the game, though it's not entirely clear why some sections are much more demanding than others, suggesting to us that there is still quite a bit of optimization work to come. And just on that, if you are seeing some of these results and going, wow, this really is going to brutalize my GPU, just note that there are some areas of the game that do perform a little bit better. Not amazingly better, it is still a super demanding game to play, but say cities, for example, some insides of starships and other indoor areas do perform quite a lot better, so you won't always see this sort of worst case performance that we're showing here, but the times you do go into those worst case scenarios, it is very, very demanding and noticeably drops in performance, which again is why we've benchmarked that section here. One of the issues with Starfield being both a really fun game to play and being super demanding on hardware is that it highlights just how diabolical this latest generation of GPU hardware is. With virtually no improvement in cost per frame in the last 3 years, we've ended up with $500 to $600 products that can't get anywhere near 60 FPS at 1440p using high settings. The RTX 4070, for example, maxed out at 50 FPS in the most demanding areas. Worse still, there are very few new GPUs that actually offer a performance uplift over the previous generation flagships. It's all very stagnant on the GPU front. There's no denying that Starfield is a ridiculously demanding game that does require further optimization work, but had mid-range current generation GPUs offered an actual performance uplift, it would be easy to achieve well over 60 FPS at 1440p using high quality settings. As for how demanding the game is, let's take the Radeon RX 6800 XT as an example. It rendered 38 FPS at 4K using medium, 33 FPS with high, and just 29 FPS with ultra. For comparison, the 6800 XT averages 41 FPS in The Last of Us Part 1 using the Ultra preset, and 41 FPS in Cyberpunk 2077 using the High preset, so a little over 40% more performance in those examples. Then in Hogwarts Legacy using Ultra, we're looking at 51 FPS, a 76% increase, and 58 FPS in A Plague Tale Requiem using the Ultra setting, so a massive 100% increase there. I'm certainly not suggesting that these are all apples to apples comparisons. We might have tested in a particularly demanding area of Starfield, but the point is when 6800 XT owners are used to seeing around 40 to 50 FPS at 4K in the latest titles maxed out, less than 30 FPS in Starfield has to sting, and it clearly illustrates just how demanding the game is. Of course, you can use upscaling in the form of FSR2, which can boost performance quite dramatically, but it's often at the cost of visuals and frankly shouldn't be used at 1080p, especially with the lower quality presets where the render scale drops to 50%. It's also pretty crazy to find a game that's so upscaling focused. For example, upscaling is enabled automatically for every single preset, and yet it only includes FSR2, no DLSS. You can now get a DLSS mod for the game that adds that in place of FSR2, but hopefully it does get added in officially by Bethesda in a future game update. I think it is very essential for this title. As for which GPU you should upgrade to for Starfield, with a look at really targeting those super demanding areas at 1440p medium to high settings and also aiming for around 60 FPS, you'll want a 6800 XT or RTX 4070 Ti. Right now, the Radeon GPU can be had for around $530 US, while the 4070 Ti will set you back $800 US, and in this example, the GeForce GPU is slower. Normally, I would opt for the $600 RTX 4070 over the discounted 6800 XT, but if your focus is Starfield, the older Radeon GPU does make more sense, given it's cheaper and faster. Ideally though, you're probably going to want to look at the Radeon RX 7800 XT, which is set for release next week, and it's rumored to deliver 6800 XT-like performance for $500 US. But of course, AMD being AMD, they decided not to make the 7800 XT and 7700 XT available for early Starfield benchmarks. How silly is that? What a wasted opportunity. No one is going to dedicate content to Starfield benchmarking next week. Everything will have been published by then, and we're certainly not updating this video in a week to include those Radeon GPUs, not unless there's a significant driver or game update to go along with it. On that note, we're keen to track the progress of Starfield over the coming months to see if performance improves and if Nvidia is able to catch AMD. For now though, we are done. If you do appreciate this sort of content and the work that people like Steve puts in even when he is sick, then please do consider supporting our Patreon and Float Plan accounts. Links to those are in the description below, or just liking the video. Also, we do have probably a few more bits of Starfield content coming up if you guys are interested. Things like looking at CPU optimization, can the game actually run well on the minimum spec CPU? Potentially, if we can convince Steve to do some CPU benchmarking as well in the other demanding sections of the game, then please do let him know below. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.